Welcome to Token Topics. The collapse of the financial system is upon us. It could happen according to this financial expert we're going to hear from. We've already seen several bank failures this year, but the worst is yet to come. What we could expect is larger banks to gain more power while the smaller ones fade out, which unfortunately could mean more control. I'm also going to go over chips and ISO20022 implementation and some dates to look forward to and how large chips is. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in. Algorand event may be over, but it's not too late to get $20 cash back in XRP if you fill out a form. Purchase a DCENT Biometric wallet through a Token Topics affiliate link, and in the description there's also a form. You fill out your information, you're going to get $20 cash back, and it's paid out November 30th. Alright, first we're going to hear words from financial expert George Gammon on what he believes is a collapse, also the implementation of central bank digital currencies and bank failures. Let's go ahead and listen.
The potential collapse of the banking system, which could usher in this CBDC, because take a sip of water. You have been warning about this, and you said that you actually think that the banking system will collapse in March of next year.
Yeah, it will, unless they step in and do something.
And you refer to the Bank Term Funding Program as the reason you can give such a specific date for that.
Yeah, so let's just go back to March 12th of 2023. So that was Silicon Valley Bank. That was First Republic, that was Signature Bank, and what most people forget, a big one out there, Credit Suisse, right? In fact, their central bank, or their central authorities just came out and said how systemically important Credit Suisse actually was, and if they would not have bailed them out, that would have created like a GFC type of scenario. Those were their words, not mine, right? So we have to go back to that date and ask ourselves, what would have happened if the Fed would not have stepped in? If they would have said, you know what, we've found religion and we're just going to let the free market do its work. We're going to let Schumpeter's creative destruction take over. What would have happened to the banking system? I think the majority of your viewers that are watching this right now would say, well, George, in that case, yeah, I mean, the system probably would have collapsed. We probably would have had a GFC 2.0. Okay, fine. And by the way, I'd like to remind all your viewers that if you look at the assets on the balance sheet or the size of the balance sheets, we actually had more banking failures in 2023 than we had in 2008. So I don't know how people can say that wasn't a crisis, right? Or that we're somehow over the crisis, like a nothing burger. How do you figure?
We had more banking failures, you mean that were prevented by being saved by the Fed, the FDIC being prevented by...
No, absolute banking. If you look at the total assets, the size of the balance sheets that went bust in 2023, even when you adjust for inflation, that exceeded the level that we saw in 2008. So how that wasn't a banking crisis, I don't know. But let's just assume for a moment, like we said, that the Fed would not have done anything. You're telling me that we would not have seen the exact same systemic risk that we saw during the GFC 1.0? Absolutely we would have. And I think that would be the base case for most people watching this. But what they don't realize is that program technically is only temporary. It ends March 11th of 2024. So people might say, oh, George, well, that's fine, but now this banking crisis is behind us. So even if it ends, we've got nothing to worry about. Well, that's where you're wrong, because you need to look at the utilization. Going back to March of 2023, the utilization of that BTFP went up to, call it, I don't have the chart in front of me, but it was right around $65 billion. Okay. So now everyone thinks that we're past that point where the Fed came in and solved all the problems, and now there's no more banking crisis that we need to worry about. But if you look at the BTFP, now it's up to 108 billion as far as the utilization. So the utilization is almost twice as much today as we speak than it was during the height of the banking crisis in March of 2023. So my point there is if it's being utilized more and more and more, that means that there's a lot more risk within the system. So if you just rug pull that BTFP, you're going to have the exact same scenario that we would have had in March if the Fed wouldn't have rolled it out to begin with.
So why would the Fed and the Treasury not just continue with this? Why would they not extend it?
Well, let's think about what Jerome Powell's trying to do.
Yes, he is trying to reduce liquidity in the markets to bring down inflation.
He's trying to bring down inflation. He wants to be remembered as Paul Volcker. Now, I'm not saying...
They should have let those banks fail in March, because that would have taken care of that.
You took the words right out of my mouth. So let's think about what would have happened to the rate of inflation if you would have let those banks fail. Yeah. We would not have seen disinflation. We would have seen outright deflation, some proper deflation. You know, we would have seen a 1930s type scenario. Now, I'm not saying this is what he wants to do or what he will do, but I'm saying this is something that people really need to think about. You know, when they watch my videos, that's what I encourage them. They think that I make all these predictions, and I really don't. The main intention for me coming on Kitco News or doing my videos is just to warn people of the risks. Yeah. It's not really to make predictions and let them come to their own conclusions based on probabilities. There are no certainties. But if you're in Jerome Powell's shoes and you can't get the rate of inflation down to 2%, you know that these darn banks are creating all these currency units that are leading to aggregate demand, that are preventing you from being the next Paul Volcker and increasing the probability that history is going to remember you as the next Arthur Burns. So you know that you've got this switch right here, that all you have to do is, oh, I'm going to flip that switch up, no more BTFP come March 12th of 2024, and you know that your inflation problem is gone.
But replaced by what? Replaced by a banking crisis, which means what? Which surely means a recession, surely has broader ramifications.
And surely means a...
Well, no, inflation.
CBDC.
Well, yes, well...
And surely means a CBDC.
When you... Well,
so there's that incentive layer on
When we were talking in March, I had several guests on the show that actually predicted or forecast or made us aware, like you do, of the possibility of a consolidation of the banking sector, which allows for a CBDC. Fewer banks there are, the closer you are to the Fed, the easier it is to implement a CBDC.
Even if it's not the Fed's balance sheet. Let's just assume that all the banks got absorbed by JP Morgan. So you've got the Fed and JP Morgan. Well, let's remember who owns the Fed. That would be JP Morgan. That would be the banks. Yeah. So if there's only one bank, then they own the Fed, right?
The banks own the Fed?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Fed technically is a private corporation.
Right.
And they have shareholders.
Yeah.
And the shareholders are the banks that are within their network, in their system, right? So if there's only one bank left standing, then by definition, they own the Fed. Right. Okay. So basically you have that gauze bank type of scenario that we talked about earlier, which was the one bank in communist Russia that could not go bust. So whether that one ledger is on the Fed's balance sheet or JP Morgan's, it still doesn't matter for the average Joe and Jane. The net result is the exact same.
So there is incentive for the Fed to stop funding this program, to stop the bank term funding program, to bring down inflation very, very quickly, reset the system in a way, cause the collapse of several banks, allowing for consolidation of banks, which takes us a step closer to implementing a CBDC, and even potentially engineering the crisis needed to implement a CBDC, saying, look what happens, you kept your money in the bank, they failed, but here we have a different system where you go directly to the Fed, which is what you were explaining earlier.
Yeah, it checks a lot of their boxes. And again, that's not my prediction. My base case would be that the Fed will extend it, that they'll come out and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and extend this BTFP. But it's not 100%. I think that there's some serious incentives as to why they wouldn't. It's definitely on the bingo card.
It's on the bingo card. Not necessarily high up there, but on the bingo card. I'm not sure that how you rank on a bingo card matters where you are on the card. It's been a while since I've played bingo. What can I say? But you mentioned Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan. And perhaps coincidentally, or not coincidentally, we're learning that Jamie Dimon, for the first time, is selling 1 million shares of JP Morgan.
$140 million worth.
$140 million worth. This is about, I think him and his family own 8.6 million shares. So this represents about a 12% stake of his overall holdings in JP Morgan. You know, he has been using the ownership of his shares for several years as a vote of confidence in JP Morgan. In the SEC filing, they said that, you know, this is no reflection on...
Of course. What are they going to say, right?
But what do you make of that? What do you make of the fact that I mean, this is to happen in early next year, because when you have that many shares, you got to say in advance when you're planning on not selling them. And, you know, JP Morgan shares doing exceptionally well. What do you make of the fact that, you know, this timing sort of coincides?
I think it's a huge red flag. I mean, I don't know how you could take it any other way, because let's just assume, let's just go through that thought experiment that Jamie Dimon is retiring and he wants to cash out some of his chips and whatnot. Okay, look, if you were very bullish on JP Morgan and the overall banking system, why would you sell those shares? Who cares if you're retiring? Wouldn't you still want the greatest return on your savings that you could possibly get? And if you felt that was the best risk reward, then why on earth would you sell?
Arguably, just to play devil's advocate, he needs the cash to buy his beautiful beachfront retirement home.
Borrow against the shares. Then you don't have to pay taxes.
Interest rates are higher. You know, I'm not saying what he's going to use the cash to pay, you know, for maybe not a house where you have some tax incentives. I don't know.
Yeah, just borrow. That's what rich people do.
Yeah.
Is they borrow against their assets so they don't have to sell those assets and absorb the capital gains. So that would be my rebuttal. That would be the highest probable outcome, or the highest probable motivation behind him taking that action if your devil's advocate case was actually the truth. But I think that, again, if I'm just using common sense, my base case would be that he sees a massive red flag. Look, and let's look at some of the other data points. We've got a curve that's massively inverted, for heaven's sakes. Yes, we've had a bear steepener as of the last, 2 or 3 months. But we still got the 10-year trading at, call it, 50 basis points under Fed funds? I mean, it's 40 basis points under reverse repo. That is a huge, huge sign that the health of the global economy is very, very poor right now, and it's getting worse. I mean, you look at what's going on in Europe. They're in absolute recession. You look at what's going on in China. I mean, they're on the brink of collapse, for heaven's sakes. And if that happens, I don't know how the U.S. avoids that. So, and then plus, you've got the BTFP that we were talking about. You don't think Jamie Dimon knows about that? Sure he does. Absolutely. So he's sitting there looking at all of his buddies in the banking system, and they're sitting there saying, holy cow, I don't know what is going to happen in 2024. The stuff could absolutely hit the fan. And then he's looking at history, and he's seeing that, oh, wow, every single time we get an inversion, well, let's say the 3-month and the 10-month, or excuse me, the 3-month and the 10-year, we usually have a recession, not months afterward. No. Usually it takes at least 18 to 24 months before the stuff actually hits the fan. You know, you go back to the inversion that we had prior to the GFC. I don't have the chart in front of me, but if my memory serves me well, the curve actually inverted in 2006. And we didn't have all that stuff happen until the middle, let's say, of 2008. This stuff never happens overnight. It always takes a long time to play out. So let's say 18 to 24 months. So Jamie Dimon is well aware of this. So he's sitting there looking at his share price, maybe looking at retirement. I don't know. I think he's more so looking at how do I take some of my chips off the table so they're not subject to a complete crash in the overall system and the share price going down by, who knows, 70, 80%. I think that's more the incentive here. And even if that doesn't play out, he realizes that there's a very high risk of that happening. So why not be on the defensive when you're 67 years old?
And there are also huge geopolitical risks and tensions, which Jamie Dimon himself highlighted. He recently said that this period might be one of the most tumultuous the world has encountered in recent memory. Yeah. So
you've got the inversion of the curve. You've got potentially World War III, which those things aren't good for the banking system.
Now, that's a very bullish video. The reason why is these banks are going to need liquidity. They're going to need these payment rails up and running. I can see how everything is playing out. This banking collapse, they want to bring in the central bank digital currencies, as that gentleman just stated. You heard from him. And we know that in 2025, I believe that is when the CBDCs are going to be going live. But between now and that time, there is a lot of exciting dates to look forward to. And for example, CHIPS. Now, CHIPS is the largest private sector high-value clearing and settlement system in the world. So the operator of CHIPS remains committed to the ISO20022 message format to enhance the efficiency of payments processing, to allow participants and end user customers to benefit from enriched data, content, and structured message formats, and to support the dollar as a global reserve settlement currency, the message format conversion will therefore place CHIPS messages in the same ISO20022 format as other global high-value payment systems, substantially enhancing the efficiency and information content of cross-border payments. Now, the ISO20022 implementation for CHIPS the date was actually changed to April of 2024. Now, because CHIPS is such a large part of global cross-border payments, I just find it, very fitting for around that same time if they are going to be having a lot of these issues. Also, keep in mind that just because we haven't seen any price action here in November doesn't mean that some of these institutions and companies can't apply the digital assets to these payments. All right. But, 2025 is definitely going to be exciting. So keep an open mind, though. But this is interesting with the ISO20022 implementation with CHIPS. Now, let's check out how big CHIPS is. So financial institutions in the U.S. and around the world rely on CHIPS to clear and settle USD payments reliably and with settlement finality. CHIPS is a premier USD clearing platform for international payment activity, with approximately 95% of CHIPS payments being the USD leg of funds transfer that begins and or ends in another country. CHIPS, which settles an average of $1.9 trillion in payments per day on a comparatively small funding base, also has a capacity and reach to satisfy every domestic high-value payment need. The new migration date allows CHIPS participants to manage and absorb changes from ISO20022 conversion in other jurisdictions, including Target 2, Euro 1, Links, and SWIFT in March 2023, which we saw this year, and CHAPS in June 2023. So as you can see, it's given that period of time to transition. So very exciting to look forward to some of these dates. Whether or not we're going to see some major price movements, that is to be determined, but we are getting close to the edge. Well, everybody, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to take advantage of that $20 cash back in XRP when you purchase a DCENT Biometric wallet. Thanks, everybody. Take care.